Ever heard of a war back in the 1860s where Paraguay basically went up against three of its neighbors?
Hmm.
Yeah, it's not exactly like common knowledge, but the Paraguayan War, get this, was absolutely devastating, like proportionally one of the most brutal wars ever.
Yeah, it really shows how old grudges, historical baggage, plus like the whole geography of a place,
Yeah.
can turn a tiny little conflict into a huge explosion.
Right, so picture it South America, 1860s.
Yeah.
And we're talking Paraguay, totally landlocked country, up against Brazil, Argentina, Andy, Uruguay ganging up on them. We've got maps, timelines, even some ancient treaties to dig through. So where do we even start with this one?
Well, to get any war, you got to get the generations of tension that came before. So think about it. South America, just getting out from under colonial rule, right? Spain and Portugal had basically carved up the entire continent, but those borders they drew, more like vague suggestions, really.
Okay, so messy borders, new countries trying to figure out who they are. Sounds like a recipe for, well, yeah, probably war.
Exactly. And this is where something you might think is small, like the Treaty of Tordesillas, signed way back in 1494. It suddenly becomes a big deal. This treaty, they made it before Columbus even reached the Americas, and it was still causing fights centuries later. Talk about a long-lasting grudge.
1494. Wow, that's some serious grudge holding. But why Paraguay? What made them, specifically the ones who seemed, I don't know, ready to blow this whole thing up?
They say geography is destiny, right? And Paraguay, they were landlocked, totally dependent on rivers for trade, for getting anything in or out. Problem was, their rivals, mainly Brazil and Argentina, they controlled most of those rivers. So you can imagine the pressure building up.
Yeah, stuck between a rock and a hard place is an understatement. Economically vulnerable, surrounded by bigger, more powerful neighbors. Not exactly the setup for a relaxing afternoon, is it?
Not at all. And this is where the personality of Francisco Solano López, Paraguay's leader back then, really throws gasoline on the fire.
Okay, Francisco Solano López. Now, there's a name that still gets people arguing. Was he a brilliant military strategist or, like, dangerously ambitious? Kind of a Napoleonic figure, maybe?
Exactly. Some historians, they'll say he was a visionary modernizing Paraguay, getting them ready for threats. Others, they say he was paranoid, obsessed with power, and he led his people straight to disaster. The truth, as always, is probably somewhere in between.
So we've got a volatile mix brewing here. Old grudges, a leader with something to prove. What was the final straw? Was it one specific event or more like a chain reaction?
Oh, it's a tangled mess, for sure. But if we had to simplify, think of it like a big chess game, right?
Yeah.
And Uruguay. Poor Uruguay is the pawn that gets sacrificed.
Okay, this is where it gets interesting. I feel like we're about to have a proxy war on our hands.
You got it. So you've got Brazil and Argentina, both trying to control Uruguay from behind the scenes. And inside Uruguay, you've got these two factions, the Blancos and the Colorados, basically acting as puppets for these bigger powers. It's almost like a mini Cold War, in a way, but with way, way higher stakes.
So how does Paraguay get roped into this whole Uruguayan mess? They were allied with the Blancos, right?
That's right. And Solano López, always thinking about who had power in the region, he felt like he had to defend his ally. Plus, there's this quote from him where he's thinking about joining the war, and he says something like, if not now, then later when it'll be worse for us. Like he knew he was taking a huge gamble, but he thought it was a risk he had to take.
A calculated risk that maybe got a little out of hand. You know, we talk about historical parallels, but this conflict, it feels unique. A
Yeah.
landlocked country willingly picking a fight with three larger neighbors. That's not exactly in the military playbook, is it?
No, it definitely wasn't the cautious approach. But to really understand where Lopez was coming from, we got to look closer at the events that lit the fuse specifically, the Uruguayan War, a conflict that was about to escalate far beyond anyone's wildest imagination.
So the Uruguayan War, already a complicated situation even before Paraguay gets involved. Can you walk us through how this smaller conflict became the catalyst for such a huge war?
Yeah, absolutely. Basically, the Uruguayan War was about Brazil and Argentina wanting to be top dog in the region, each one backing a different side in Uruguay's internal power struggles. Paraguay, being allied with the Blancos in Uruguay, they felt like they had to step in.
Like a domino effect, almost. One power play bumping into another until, boom, you've got a continental war.
Perfect way to put it. It shows how these smaller conflicts, they can spiral out of control so fast when you've got all these different countries involved, each with their own goals and rivalries. In this case, Paraguay's few moves were actually targeting Brazil, trying to scare them off from getting more involved in Uruguay.
And this is where that whole landlocked thing comes back to bite them, right? They have to go through Argentina just to get to the fight.
Exactly. Paraguay, they asked Argentina, hey, can we pass through your territory? You got to get to Uruguay. But Argentina, already buddy-buddy with Brazil, they said, nope, not a chance. Put Paraguay in a really tough spot.
Yeah, talk about a diplomatic dead end. Hemmed in by geography and alliances.
Exactly. Feeling trapped, Paraguay basically said, fine, it's war then, and declared war on Argentina. And with that, things were about to get way, way worse. The Triple Alliance was formed, Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay, all teaming up against Paraguay.
What gets me looking at this timeline now is that Argentina thought this would be a quick victory, like just march into Asunción, take the capital, be home in a few months. Did anyone think Paraguay actually stood a chance against those odds?
At first, no way. The Allies, they were totally confident, completely underestimated Paraguay's, their determination and how good their military actually was. And then Paraguay started winning, and it shocked everyone.
Seriously.
Yeah.
So much for that quick victory, huh?
Yeah, tell me about it. The Mato Grosso campaign's a great example. Paraguay, instead of waiting around to be attacked, they surprised everyone and launched an offensive right into Mato Grosso, which was a Brazilian province. It took important towns, even messed up Brazil's economy by capturing some gold and diamond mines.
So not just defending, but taking the fight right to the enemy's doorstep. That's ballsy, especially when you're facing those kinds of numbers. Were these victories enough to turn the tide, though?
They were important, those early wins, but in the long run, not enough. The tide started turning at the Battle of Riachuelo.
That was a naval battle, right. Kind of a big disadvantage when you're a landlocked country.
You said it. Battle of Riachuelo, decisive win for the Brazilian Navy. Gave them control of the rivers, which was everything in that region. You needed the rivers to move troops, to move supplies, everything. Paraguay, cut off from all that, they had to rely more and more on whatever they had left at home.
I'm looking at these maps, and the fortress of Humaitá really stands out. Big stronghold right on the Paraguay River. Seems like the kind of place you could hold out against a siege for a long, long time.
Humaitá was crucial, strategically. It was a bottleneck, basically. The Allies had to take it if they wanted to get to Asunción, and hold out it did, way longer than anyone thought. That siege, it was brutal. Went on for 2 years. Turned Humaitá into like a symbol of Paraguay's resistance, but also, sadly, a trap that would lead to their defeat.
2 years. I can't even imagine being under siege that long. Constant bombardment, close quarters fighting. Our timeline mentions they even used hot air balloons for reconnaissance. That seems unbelievably advanced for that era.
Oh, it was. Both sides were using some pretty innovative stuff during the siege of Humaitá. The Paraguayans, with Solano López right there in command, they fought like crazy, using every trick they could. But even the best defense can't last forever when you're totally outmatched. And eventually, Humaitá fell.
Must have been a crushing blow for Paraguay. Was this the turning point, would you say?
Yeah, the fall of Humaitá. It feels like a turning point, not just in the war itself, but for Solano López too. Knowing how driven he was, I can't imagine him just giving up, even after a loss that big. Oh, absolutely. Humaitá falling, it meant the war changed. Went from big battles to, like, a desperate fight for survival. And Solano López, true to form, he refused to back down, pulled back his forces, went for a guerrilla warfare strategy, basically said, we're going to make them fight for every inch of ground.
Guerrilla warfare, though. That
Yeah.
changes the whole game, right? Suddenly it's not clear who's a soldier and who's a civilian anymore.
Exactly. This became a war fought in the jungles, the swamps, not out in the open. And it wasn't just the army fighting anymore either. Civilians got pulled in, even women and children. Everyone had to help, had to contribute however they could.
Man, that's both incredibly brave and just heartbreaking. You know, it shows how desperate things had become, but also the strength of the Paraguayan people. We got to talk about Ramona Martinez, the Paraguayan Joan of Arc from the timeline. What's her story?
Oh, Ramona Martinez. She's a fascinating figure and kind of controversial, too. She was young, supposedly fought right alongside the troops, known for being fearless and giving these inspiring speeches. Whether she was actually in combat, like with a weapon, there's some debate about that. But either way, her story, it became a powerful symbol, showed how much the Paraguayans were willing to sacrifice, how much they were willing to fight back, even when everything was stacked against them.
That spirit of defiance, of never giving up hope, it's incredible, but this level of resistance, even with all that heart, there had to be a price.
There was a terrible one. Paraguay's population, it was decimated, reduced to a fraction of what it was before the war. The numbers are debated, but most historians think the majority of the population died. In battle, from disease, from starvation. It was devastating.
The majority. I mean, that's almost incomprehensible, the scale of that loss.
It really shows you the real cost of war,
Yeah.
not just the numbers on a battlefield, but the human cost, the lasting impact. Generations wiped out. The scars left on Paraguay, they're still there today.
What about the long-term effects on Paraguay? I mean, politically, economically, they fought so hard, but what was the lasting impact of this war?
They were in ruins, basically.
Mm.
Lost huge chunks of territory to their neighbors. The economy was shattered, and society, it was completely torn apart. Recovering from that, it was a monumental task. The war, it held Paraguay back for decades, and in some ways, they're still dealing with the consequences.
So looking back on it all, this devastating war, how do we even make sense of it? Was it a noble but ultimately doomed attempt at staying independent? Or a tragedy, a nation led down a dark path by a leader who wanted too much?
The Paraguayan War, it's not an easy one to figure out. It's a mix of old resentments, geopolitical power grabs, and a whole nation that just refused to give up, even when the odds were impossible.
Right.
It really makes you think about leadership, the good and the bad that comes with ambition. And it reminds us of the human cost of war, a cost that can echo for generations.
It's a reminder that history isn't simple, that's for sure. The Paraguayan War, it's a cautionary tale. Shows how easily a small conflict can explode into something huge, and how seeking victory, even for the right reasons, can sometimes come at a terrible, terrible price.
It's a story that deserves to be remembered, not just for the battles, but for the people who lived through it. Their courage, their resilience, their sacrifices, that's what we should remember.
Well said. And with that, we'll leave our listeners to think about the legacy of the Paraguayan War. It's a conflict that most of the world has forgotten, but one that changed the fate of South America forever.